Welcome, good morning. Welcome to the second and last day of our conference, Culture, Cohesion and Social Impact, an initiative within the scope of the Portuguese presidency of the EU Council. This fourth panel will now start, has the topic Culture and Gender Equality. The debate will be moderated by Anna Kedziorek, who will be with us remotely, police officer at the European Commission's Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. On this panel, we'll also have as participants Isabel Zois, an actress, photographer Pauliana Pimentel, Maxi Guedes, project manager at the Key Change at PRS Foundation and drummer and founder of Gravy Records. And also remotely, we'll have Paul Vautrin-Grévis, an expert to the OMC Group on Gender Equality on the cultural and creative sectors, and Equality and Diversity Officer at the French Ministry of Culture. Anna, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Hello, it's my pleasure to be here. My name is Anna Kedziorek Ramirez, and I work in the European Commission in the Directorate General for Education and Culture. I work in the unit dealing with cultural policy, and one of the areas where I focus my work is gender equality in the cultural and creative sectors. So this is a big pleasure for me to be here. Rather to moderate this panel, sorry, I'm here in Brussels, and I'm very envious of everyone who's actually in Porto. I very warmly thank the Portuguese presidency for the invitation. So to begin with, I would like to say that I'm very happy that this conference is taking place in May, because May is the European Diversity Month. And during that time, many actions are taken across the EU to raise awareness of the importance of diversity and inclusion in our workplaces and in our societies. And I think that this conference, and especially this panel, greatly contribute to the objectives of the month. There is also another reason why this discussion is very timely. In autumn 2019, Ursula von der Leyen became the first female president of the European Commission, and she declared gender equality as one of her priorities. She managed to gather a gender balance commission. In March 2020, the Commission presented the gender equality strategy for the years 2020-2025. The strategy comes up with key actions proposed and, of course, recommends an increased gender perspective in all EU policies, including culture. Thirdly, gender equality is now at the core of the EU policymaking and funding for culture. In the work plan for culture for the years 2019-2022, which was adopted by the Council, which means by the EU member states, gender equality in the culture and creative sectors was selected as one of the priorities for action. And as a result, the European Commission implemented several activities in this field. Gender equality is one of the specific objectives of the new Creative Europe program, which should promote female talent in order to support women's artistic and professional careers, and which will be adopted very soon. Well, role of culture is essential for promoting diversity and inclusion, and culture and media shape people's values and perception of reality. They help us to dialogue and better understand each other, and as such, they can efficiently combat harmful stereotypes. However, if women are well represented in the culture and creative sectors and very often participate in culture more than men, when it comes to their specific situation and role in the culture and creative sectors, inequalities become apparent. And I think it is even exacerbated when overlapping social factors, such as, for example, race, age, disability, or sexual orientation come into play. Of course, all the humans want to live in the world free from discrimination, and we hope for a future which is safe and sustainable where we and our children can enjoy equal rights and opportunities, where all people can enjoy positive freedom to create and enjoy the basic human rights. Well, yes, the right to freely participate in culture and enjoy the arts is enshrined in Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So, well, if women compose roughly half of the world's population like men, this is only fair, but they are giving the corresponding part of the cake in the creative process and at the decision-making table. It is fair, but it is also very much needed that contribution by women, by men, by gender and non-binary people are given equal consideration in the process of deep economic and societal transformation, which is currently underway. The societies simply have too much to gain from the skills, ideas, perspectives, and creative output of half of the humanity. Women's equal share in the cultural and creative value chain is essential for cultural diversity and democracy. But now let me turn to our speakers, whom right from the start I will ask to respect their allotted time so that we can enjoy a meaningful discussion later on. So if you let me, I will first approach our artists who are in Porto, I believe, and we will start with Pauliana Pimentel, who is a prized photographer. Pauliana's career has revolved around gender issues. Her photography gives us the opportunity to discover, in close proximity and intimacy, original subjects and context, which we believe to be featured only in the realms of fiction. But the honesty of her images tells us beautiful stories about communities and individuals whose self-expression is a revolutionary act of freedom. Pauliana, I don't see you. I hope you're there. We are very curious to see some of your powerful images and hear some of your stories. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
Good morning to you all. My name is Pauliana Pimentel. I'm a visual artist for over 20 years, and I use especially a photographic image as a way to express myself. I would like to thank the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union, especially the Minister of Culture for the invitation. I would also like to express my sorrow for the death of the plastic artist Julian Sarmento, who gave us such a wide and relevant work. In the last 9 years, I have been discussing social issues in different countries. And in my work, very often I approach youth, nomads, and social groups that are outcasts. Youth is now a recurring theme when the Greek crisis started. Young people in Athens reflect the European crisis and the way how young people adjust and look at the future. After Greece, we had the youngsters from Northern Europe, a series that was called The Passenger, a train trip from Latvia to Poland, and showed young artists that tried to live from their art. In this series, I was faced with a Europe that was being questioned, where the experiences of the fathers no longer could be useful for the children. We had to reinvent new ways of life. In the Behavior of Being, I show a group of young artists that are living in Algarve in the midst of nature. And from London, I understood how important it was to slow down and the relevance of social media and how this experience can in fact influence the artistic process. I'm very much interested in young people because this is when we believe we can change the world, when we have the capacity to transform, when everything is being questioned and everything is being felt in a very extreme way. In my work, it's also important the travel, nomads from North Africa to the Middle East, and that has to do with discoveries that I make that include literature, music, cinema, painting, but also traveling through Portugal and my inner world. Makeup and From Here to Eternity. This is work that took place in Lisbon, where I live. From Here to Eternity is a portrait of my personal life, the people that I identify myself with, and it's a compliment to being female. Makeup shows prostitution of transgender youngsters in regional Lisbon. I was always fascinated by these men, women that present themselves in a very dignified way, exposed to the dangers of night and living as outcasts. For many years, I gained courage to approach them and to be able to take these pictures in their intimacy. In the beginning, it's always this feeling of a blind date. I never know what I'm going to find, and this is absolutely fascinating. My images are the result of the trust and complicity with the picture I'm photographing, and it's always a cooperation work. And this shows a group of transgender youngsters in the Isle of Saint Vicente in Cape Verde. This is where I realized that there is a myth that states that if you sit on a particular stone, you become gay. Here I met Stefan and some of his friends, ages between 17 and 25 years of age. They like to wear female clothes, makeup, and to be addressed in female names. There is this huge lack of tolerance towards gay people in many African countries. In some situations, this has been driven as a result of religious beliefs, and in other situations, because of ignorance. Many people from Africa have to migrate to Europe in order to express freely their sexuality. In 2004, this is the year that made it legal for people of the same gender to have a relationship. Until then, it was a crime. The law has changed, but there's still lack of equality. And so it's very important to understand this community, to understand their dreams, their hopes, their fears, and where their courage and demeanor was coming from. And so the idea of this work was to face the bystander with the prejudice, challenging the huge convention regarding the identity of the human being. Simone de Beauvoir stated, "No one is born a woman, people become women." And maybe this work has as a goal to unfold what it means to be a woman in today. From the island of San Vicente, I went to the island of San Miguel in the Azores in this series that is known as the Narcissism of Small Differences, and I have shown youngsters from this island. San Miguel, which is a paradise, which is quite a paradox in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, that has very old contradictions, is a stratified society that isolates itself. The title has to do with what Freud wrote, that discusses the idea of small differences based on the feelings of awkwardness and hostility that arise between the different people of different regions of the world. And here, just like all types of work, I am interested in creating a dialogue and not confrontation. As in this island, I have found people who are very much away from the rest of the world and very much reflecting on their own differences. Very frail young people, very sad young people that have all the features of the age and that reflect an absolutely charming side of them. In my series, the goal is always to build a narrative, recording situations of their daily lives, so that this image in the photography is somewhere between poetry and the document, in a mixture of inner landscapes and individuals, as well as photographs. Sometimes I complement my work with moving images, and I would like to show you a video in an old Portuguese fort in Mindelo that is part of this series. Can you please show the video? Tem o máximo o pormenor das coisas. In spite of all the problems related to being an artist, I have a passion for what I do, and have a passion for all the processes, the research, editing, try to find the right space for the presentation of my work. I like the openings, I like to watch the reaction of the audiences, I like the possibility to see my work published in a book, or to see my work in the house of a friend or a collector. Teaching is also very relevant to be able to share my knowledge and to learn. Last year, in spite of the pandemics, I was working in 2 new series. So descendants from African people who live in Lisbon and Far East, that shows the community of gypsies in the Algarve. Both these series will be presented today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pauliana. Impressive, really wonderful pictures. I was personally impressed with I think, very close and intimate contact, which indeed you managed to build with the people. And I think it really shows also how culture and the opportunity to self-express can break the chains imposed by the society. So I really, I'm impressed. But I would also like to see the presentation by Isabelle Zoua, who's our next panelist. And I think that her presentation would lead us to the issue of representation in the cultural sphere and intersectionality. Because, well, we will only have plurality and diversity of expressions in the cultural sphere if the cultural sphere reflects the plurality of visions and ideas present in the societies. Unfortunately, many of them are very often silenced, and this silencing has consequences in the way that we as societies see our past, present, and future. So, Isabelle, I think you're going to talk about the role of women as authors of their own stories, narratives, but also about intersectional women and the representation of their stories and of their bodies. So, Isabelle, the floor is yours.
Good morning to you all. I would like to thank everyone for the invitation, to all those involved in this conference, for allowing me to be present at this fundamental moment of change and hope, as we heard yesterday. I'm Isabelle Zoua. I was born in Lisbon, and I'm the daughter of a mother from Angola and a father from Guinea-Bissau. And in my education, in my construction, I always had this multicultural nature of being born in one place, but being influenced by other cultures from other places. When I was younger, I thought I lived in a non-place because at institutions, at school, I was seen as African, though I never set foot at the time in the African continent. At home, with my closest family, I was seen as very European, very Portuguese in my way of being. In my father's family at Guinea-Bissau, I was seen as very Angolan, and in the Angolan family, from my mother's side, I was seen as a Guinean person. So I always felt in a non-place. As I grew and got educated, I understood that this was an added value, having access to so many different cultures and so complex cultures with stories and history that isn't always happy. So I got training at Chapiteau Theatre in theatre education, and I graduated in the highest school of theatre and cinema in Lisbon. And I also took a course in Brazil. All of that added richness, giving me different perspectives on the issues of race and gender. Since 2010, or even before, sorry, in Portugal, I worked in culture. Though I was born in Lisbon, I grew up at Lourdes in the northern region of Lisbon, where I had the possibility of fostering culture in the Escolhas, which means choices, project, where I established a connection between the community of people of African origin with school institutions. So I taught theater, I helped children in their activity and in the programming of those activities. In Brazil, it was fundamental for me to create a project on identity in 2010, when I had this exchange course in scenic arts. This has to do with the rescuing of the black body without the prejudice and stereotypes I was used to, or I didn't feel comfortable in seeing. And within that training in theater, I always asked, who would I be in the 70s? When we studied the narratives of those times, who would I be in the 1500s with my body within that context? So those were levers that allowed me to create narratives I wasn't used to listening to at school books or in the movie and theater art processes of bodies that don't have the experience of a non-white body and end up stereotyping our experiences, objectifying us. So I started working and developing this identity project in Brazil between communities and institutions, where we rescued, so to say, the self-esteem of the black body socially and on stage. So I then kept moving between Portugal and Brazil, talking about identity through hair, self-esteem, rescuing our natural beauty, being aware of the reasons for our change as black women. There is a film that started in Rotterdam called Capella, where I do the physical and bodily preparation, the choreography, and I participate in this movie, Cabela. It's online if you want to watch. K, it starts with a K, Cabela, which has to do with rescuing the self-esteem of the hair of black women. We also use that sentence by Simone de Beauvoir. A woman becomes a woman. You are not born a woman. There's a sentence by Nina Simone, which has been the guideline for my decisions as a contemporary artist. She says, the duty of an artist is to reflect their times, and that has been extremely fundamental for me, since as an artist, using the spotlights that the stage and the cinema provide me with, I approach topics, though I'm invited to participate and I'm not working from root, to bring forward that self-esteem and verticality to the characters. And now also as a director, I was invited by an artist in Cape Verde who lives in Trento in northern Italy to be the director, not of actors or actresses, but of a show at the San Marco Theatre of migrant women living at Trento, a project related to violence against women. It's called Siamo tutti mariposa, which means we are all butterflies, which I had an opportunity to work with last year. So I keep moving around between Portugal, Brazil, and Italy in the meantime. And when I returned to Portugal, I met with Cleo Diari and Nadira Sema, two artists, where we created the first part of the trilogy, the Black Dawn, Aurora Negra, which will be brought back to National Theatre in June and will be coming to Porto to the Rivoli Theatre in October, if you want to watch. It talks about our experiences of black bodies, of black women. It's impossible for me to talk about gender without talking about race, without talking about color. So now I would have a question for the audience, and I would like really to have an answer. Did any of you notice that I am the only non-white person in this room throughout the 2 days of the conference? You did? I don't know if you thought about it. Dias Nascimento and other theoricists talk about the syndrome of the single body in spaces of power and privilege. That's mostly how I feel when I'm invited to events like this. The single body. I don't feel so unique today because I have this artist here that brought us her work and gave me the strength to be here without feeling an orphan. But it's constant. And I have a few things I would like to read here. I like to improvise, but I had a structure here to read to you. It's impossible to talk about gender without talking about color. The economic model, now we'll talk about economics, the global economic model cannot be left aside from human dignity, especially issues related to gender, race, class, and migration. The world is obviously made of inequalities and asymmetric relationships between men and women. Inequality in wage, access to goods and services, opportunities, contributes even further to disfavor and not to be able to somehow appropriate the fruits of economic growth, services and public policies, and access to culture. Gender and race discrimination are still present not only in the world of labor but also of the public and private spheres, thus restating the non-existence of a race democracy. We don't have a racial democracy. I often say that we suffer from the syndrome of good people because we deny, firstly, that we are racist, homophobes. No, we have the syndrome of being good people. We don't want to be accused. No one wants to be accused. So we somehow deny systemic racism and structural racism. We deny male chauvinism and this structural system and end up alienated from solving these issues. It's distractive for us to say that we don't consider ourselves racist, but more than being a non-racist, saying, I'm not a racist, we should be anti-racist. We should not be passive. So it is important for bodies that reproduce gesture, thoughts that are prejudicial to be agents of change, not to leave it in the hands of the people who suffer from that prejudice, not just to be up to the oppressed. We are exhausted. We must work on resilience to be at places like this, talking about our history with self-esteem, dignity, and respect. And so the issue of cultural diversity is important to enrich. That exchange is important. Equality, yes. Respect, yes. But more than that, equity. I would like to have played a video. I don't know if anyone here knows the video of the $100 race. Did you ever hear about it? It's a good video to look for. The $100 race, where we have several students in a sports class, and from their experience, they have positions to run. And it's interesting as it works on equity. More than equality, me and Pauliana and Paulina, we don't have, we have different situations of getting benches of the same size and height to get to the same level. We have to adapt the height of the bench to our height, physical height, to our biographies and to our stereotypes. So we need this adjustment. Equality is important, but equity is also very important. So within that equity, I've been working as a director, also with photography and video art. I started a series in 2015 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, called Black Pietà. That work came out of a course I took in art history, where all non-white bodies I saw represented were always from the perspective of the white bodies, of the white experience. And that made me truly upset, because it was always a view on my experience, a stereotyped look on my existence. So I talked to the teacher, Rafael Fonseca, a teacher of art history in Rio de Janeiro, and I started doing research and did a work that started with photography. And I started with Michelangelo's work of the Pietà. And I said Pietà is the body of the black woman in the African territory who was raped. The African continent was raped. Lots of abuse in terms of territories, bodies, raw materials. And now Europe has condescendence towards the African continent, but its basic wealth comes from the African continent. The diamonds, gold, ivory come from the African continent. So we need to create policies for history retribution. There is some constraint about this topic and these matters, but the truth is we're not guilty of that. It was our ancestors that did it, but we perpetuate that vision and that convention in our relationships, even in our thoughts, in our gesture regarding non-white bodies. White is seen as the current majority, though not in number. The truth is that it's a majority in terms of decision-making, and all that is non-white is considered neutral. So in African, Asian, Latin American territories, where the language is European, the official language is European, in history books, we only have the perspective of the Eurocentric vision of facts, because the other bodies did not have the opportunity to state their perspective in history, to document it with photography, with writing. So it's important to think about it. We don't think we are structurally racist or chauvinistic, but we perpetuate that kind of thought. So we should think about it. We are all learning, of course. No one is pointing fingers. We are all here as elements and agents of change. It's easy to say I'm not a racist, but do nothing about it. Now I would like to play the video to close, the video of the Black Pietà that was made last year in Lisbon for the first time. I've been doing it in Brazil. Could you please play the video? It's in the Aurora Negra show as well. We show some of the perspective of history, of the same history, where we can see the body of the Pietà and the martyrs with African drawings, matriarchal societies, where we bring that merger of the two visions of history. Some call it discoveries and praise it. And it is important for a people that says it is noble to acknowledge nobility and humanity in other people. The two sides of the coin, of the same history. Thank you.
Wow.
If you want to read this book.
Muito obrigada, Isabel,
Thank you very much,
pela sua
Isabel.
poderosa intervenção e pelas imagens. Obrigada. I think that your contribution is indeed significant to the rethinking of the cultural sphere, cultural institutions, and for the healing of the societies from the colonial past and wounds that actually narrowed down the perception of the other human beings and hinder cooperation and trust building. So definitely, I think it's also actually very pertinent in the context of a growing populism, backlash of women on women's rights, and growing nationalist and xenophobic sympathies. So thank you. But now let's change the sector. Culture is all about diversity. So we had visual arts, we had performance arts. Now we go to music, and we are going to explore this world, which is still actually presents tremendous gender gaps and gender roles in music production and decision making. And it will be Maxi Gage who will bring us into this world. She runs Key Change, a project which deals directly with the issue of representation of gender minorities. It is co-funded by Creative Europe, by the way, and it is focused on bringing change within the music sector. So, dear Maxi, could you tell us more about Key Change and the reflection that it has brought into the music sector, maybe? The floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you all. It's an honor to be here and participate and also witness the amazing presentations so far. So thank you. Yes, my name is Maxi. I'm based in London in the UK, and I work for PRS Foundation, who are the UK's leading charitable funder of new music and talent development. So we give grants to musicians in the UK, and I am the project manager for Key Change, which is an international project that we work on, and we founded back in 2017. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Key Change today. I'm also a drummer and I run a record label, so I think it's important to acknowledge that I bring a lot of my own experiences to my work at Key Change, as well as industry experience too. So what is Key Change? Key Change is an international campaign and network for gender equality. And we aim to diversify the current music industry to create a more sustainable and stronger community for all genders. And I think it's, as we've kind of mentioned so far in this panel, it's so important to note that diversity and positive action doesn't just have an impact on women and gender minorities or underrepresented people. It has a positive impact on everyone. And current studies in the music industry show that there's still a drastic lack of gender diversity in both local and international music scenes. And Key Change is a collaborative project that works with collection societies across the world. And our stats from the collection societies that we work with show that women make up about 20% of songwriters in each of the countries that we work in, which obviously is not representative of the population. So we believe that the lack of visibility has created a system in which women and other marginalized genders have been consistently held back and dissuaded from participating in the music industry. In order to achieve equal and diverse representation in music, we must all work urgently as a community to increase the visibility, output, and participation of underrepresented gender groups. And just to say that these include women as well as non-binary, gender diverse and transgender individuals of all genders. We include all genders who experience barriers because of their gender in our movement for change. And we aim to rectify the pattern of uniform lineups, boards, and staffing by prioritizing the work and the visibility of underrepresented genders. And as you can see here, we're supported by the Creative Europe program of the European Union, and we're currently led by Reeperbahn Festival in Hamburg. But we are a global network and equality movement, and we include kind of core partners and collaborators in 12 countries, but a network that is much wider than that. So how does Key Change make change? We have a participant program. So the Key Change program is where we work with individuals to empower them and encourage them to be the change. We have recognized 74 women and gender minority artists and innovators. So we work with music creators as well as industry professionals who are working behind the scenes in the music industry. And we fund them to take part in our program every year. So we have 74 people taking part annually. And they have a mentoring program. They take part in international showcases, panel events, a capacity building program where we give them inspirational talks and training, so upskilling them to help them realize their full potential and to help them get to the next stage in their career. So that strand, as I've said, is funded by the Creative Europe program of the European Union. And it's really important that we are able to work with individual talent to really understand the actual experiences of individuals in the music industry, so that we can then address the barriers that they face in a real way and not kind of assuming what they will experience. They really lead our movement and help us to shape the action that we take. And then we have the Key Change Pledge, which is how we try to make change on an organizational level. So representation is a huge issue in the music industry, as I've just said, and the Key Change Pledge is a way for any organization working in the music industry to take accountability and be part of the solution rather than the problem. And we currently have nearly 500 music organizations from all over the world, over 40 countries, signed up to the pledge. And basically, the pledge is a kind of contract that the organization has with us, where they commit to achieving 50% representation of women and gender minorities in any area of their work. So that can be on the board, on the stages, in the rosters, in the workforce, in the music that you're broadcasting on your radio station. It's really bespoke to any organization, and it encourages those organizations to start doing what they can to create positive change. And here is our group of 74 participants who are currently on the Key Change program. We were very lucky to meet in Stockholm in March 2020 before the pandemic hit, and take part in a 3-day session of amazing, inspiring, creative collaboration and learning. And you can check them all out on the Key Change website, which is keychange.eu, and book them for your festivals and conferences and sessions. They're ready. So a huge strength of Key Change is the power of our network. We have our participants, we have our industry partners in 12 countries. We have our signatories, who are our pledge signatories. We have our content partners who help us deliver our capacity building program. We also have a network of ambassadors, mentors, and everyone is working together to create positive change. We find that mostly in the music industry, people do want to see a more diverse industry, and they do want to see 50% representation of women and gender minorities across the board, but they don't really know what their role is or how to take that first step to make change. And so Key Change gives them the opportunity to challenge their ways of working and think about where they could make change that is both ambitious but also realistic. So it's not going to change overnight, but it's acknowledging that we as an industry, if we take responsibility and take the steps that we can, then we can see a more equal future. And it's really important that key change is led by the industry itself. So our partners are the most cutting edge international festivals. They are change makers in the music industry. And we have brought together this amazing cohort of 13 festivals who work with us in their countries to bring more people on board and to help to make positive change and try to shift the bar in terms of representation on their own lineups too. So all of these festivals have signed up to the pledge, and many of them are already achieving 50% representation. And we're going to be working with them over the next 4 or 5 years, which is the current phase of Key Change, to promote and showcase the Key Change program talent and influence wider change in these 12 countries and beyond. And it's really important to know, I mean, this might look a bit cynical in terms of saying how far we've reached, but I think it's important to us that the change that we're making is not insular. We are trying to mainstream gender equality, which I know is widely used kind of outside of the music industry and in policy, but in the music industry, I think that people work in their own sectors, in their own genres, or in their own regions, and we're really trying to connect the dots and make sure that we are truly collaborating and working together and making change. And so again, we work with this large network of ambassadors, and we present innovation awards here, but we want to influence wider change in the creative industries and beyond. And here's Isque, he's a Canadian participant. And this is because we know that the music industry has a gender problem, and what the pandemic has presented us is a very urgent situation where a third of all music creators are reported to be leaving the industry. And we know that women and gender minorities are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And we know that we need to work harder than ever right now to keep our talent in the music industry and support the best emerging artists to realize their potential. Otherwise, underrepresented genders will leave the industry, take longer to recover, and the industry suffers. Intersectionality is very important to Key Change. Our research shows that by hosting or by leading positive action campaigns focused on one protected characteristic, it has a positive knock-on effect for every other. So we know that women do not experience the music industry simply because of their gender. They experience it based on every other aspect of their identity, including sexuality, race, disabilities, age, socioeconomic background, and others. And so we have a very individual attitude to Key Change, where we use our amazing diverse participant group cohort to inform the work that we do, and we do not focus simply on gender identity, but we aim to listen and support women of all backgrounds, of all identities, and create an inclusive environment that ultimately supports a diverse music industry across the board. And finally, another way that we're making change is at the end of every program that we run, we present a Key Change Manifesto. We did this in 2018 We presented a manifesto at the European Parliament in Brussels, which actually influenced some of the Creative Europe policies on monitoring. So we recognise 4 key areas: acknowledgement, investment, research and education, which needs urgent work in the music industry. And our suggestion is that that is not limited to the music industry, that we can work with other sectors to help make change elsewhere. So this is us at European Parliament, and we will be presenting another manifesto at the end of this project in 2024 at Tallinn Music Week, where we will be looking back at the impact of the Key Change Pledge and the Key Change Participant Programme and making suggestions for the music industry and beyond. And so that's Key Change, and I look forward to discussing it more in relation to everyone else's work shortly.
Thank you very much, Maxi. Again, impressive presentation, and thank you very much for doing so much for empowering underrepresented talents in the music sectors. And I think it definitely gives us much food for thought when it comes to policymaking. And I think it can, and maybe it already has inspired similar movements in other sectors. So wonderful. Now, since I mentioned the policy action, I am very impatient to listen to our next speaker. It's Paul Vautrin, who is the project manager at the Department of Equality and Diversity in the French Ministry of Culture. France is actually doing a great job in combating gender inequality in the cultural and creative sectors. And Paul had the opportunity to share his experience with within the EU Experts Working Group in the framework of the EU Work Plan for Culture that I mentioned earlier. So we call it Open Method of Coordination, OMC Group. And the objective of this group was to look at what is being done in this field across Europe. So Paul, if you could bring us, take us a bit through your experience and then maybe talk about the work of the group. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Anna, for this introduction. And thank you, of course, to the presidency for the invitation on this beautiful panel. So I'm very happy to present today my experience about working in the group that Anna described and about the conclusions we arrived to. Just to be clear, this is not an official presentation, but more of a teaser of the work that I had a chance to participate in the last couple of years. So this is my experience as an expert, among others from all around Europe. And more exactly, I was acting expert in replacement of my boss, Agnès Salle, who is the senior official for equality and diversity, and who's the leader of the Department of Equality and Diversity in my ministry. So I want to present as briefly as possible the mandate of our group and that led to the report, just to describe what got us to work, basically. The mandate was proposed by the Commission and confirmed by the member states in CAC, in the Cultural Affairs Committee, on the basis of the Work Plan for Culture, which was prepared and adopted under the Austrian presidency in 2018. We tried to include examples and to acknowledge experiences and situations from the entirety of the cultural and creative sectors, so from audiovisual to architectures, from music to video gaming, etc., as well as aspects of cultural mainstreaming in other sectors. And we try to seek synergies, which is to say, trying not to redo what was already done, but to share and continue the work done by previous groups, by previous experts and institutions, and taking into account their findings and their studies. So the objectives were to present and discuss legal frameworks, policies and initiatives at national, regional, and local level that aim to combat gender stereotypes and to achieve gender equality in the cultural and creative sectors, as well as identify key challenges, key causes to discriminations, and identify and share good practices and promising initiatives to promote gender equality. And we recommended evidence-based measures. We also paid, though I won't delve into it, special attention to the implementation of gender budgeting methodologies, and we share good practices on gender indicators. So the examined issues during our work with relation to gender inequality. So gender stereotypes, I won't have time, of course, to describe what gender stereotypes we have to face and we had to discuss. But for instance, women being seen as the muses or the vessels for bringing forth creativity of men, as opposed to being seen as being creative leads themselves, or the importance of physical appearance as well, being greater for women than for men. The part on the chapter on sexual violence and harassment is also a major one. So of course, people of all genders and identities can be victims or authors of this, but statistically it still affects mainly women. And it's not just the actions that were discussed, but also the feeling of impunity, because when actors go unpunished, it's making victims feel as if there is no recourse but to leave the cultural project, the structure, or even the profession altogether. We also discussed access to resources in terms of creating and distributing cultural products, participation in decision-making and positions and entrepreneurships, the position in the labor market relative to the segregation altogether, or the social rights related to pregnancy and maternity, pay and pensions as well, and career pathways and representation, both in cultural and artistic programs and within the cultural institutions. To describe the group briefly, so we were 22 member states, and so 30 nominated experts in total. The work was coordinated and strongly supported by the Commission, by Anna, who's moderating today. And it was chaired by the Austrian expert, Heidemarie Meissnitzer, who will present officially and more extensively than I can do today, the report at the next CAC next month. There were 6 general meetings and many exchanges and meetings. It's for a group as well. So half of that was in meetings in Brussels and half of that was online, as we adapted in real life to the COVID crisis. We invited a series of excellent speakers to inspire and seek synergies, as I said. And so it was overall a very important, a great opportunity to work together and to see and to understand different perspectives. There is a very clear value of this kind of work to me. We are often focused on our own work, on our little scale, and European meetings are a very important chance to compare our work and to improve our processes together. So the report that will condense all the conclusions and a number of good practices should be published late this month or early next month at the latest. I want to discuss briefly the specific challenges that are being faced in the cultural and creative sectors, because contrary to what can sometimes be thought, and I know that it is the case in France at least, inequality and discrimination are common in these sectors. So this is not to single out culture as the bad apple here, of course, but just to say that equality is not more natural in our field of expertise than in other sectors. And this is in good part imputable to specific risks due to the nature of the sector and of the work. So I gathered here 3 families, let's say, of specific challenges: flexibility, the market being complex, and self-employment. And this has specific effects on gender equality. For instance, the fact that the work is mostly informal, that there's a lack of security, of transparency about salaries, a lack of collective identity, and the necessary self-promotion means that workers often have a weak position in employment negotiations. It is usually harder than in other sectors for them to ask for a proper salary, a proper contract, better work conditions, or, as I mentioned, to resist against harassment or violence. And we know that women are socially more pushed towards self-censorship, so it is even harder for them to negotiate. Another matter is the fact that self-employment, self-promotion in a highly competitive sector can mean isolation. And this has usually more impact on people who have less support in professional networks. And this is often the case of women compared to men. And this is especially noticeable in professions with varied revenue structures and rights, the careers that are complex to navigate, basically, to know how one's rights and duties work, especially difficult without the support without colleagues around you. And the third point I want to mention is the work-life balance. So the conjunction of unorthodox and intensive hours, the fact that the work is usually freelance-based or project-based, the fact that there's a lot of mobility in terms of touring and traveling, and that it's informal, of course. And all of that means that work tends to invade private life in the cultural and creative sectors. And this has a lot more impact on women and on people who traditionally and still often have to add more unpaid care work to their day. And this leaves overall less opportunity for career progression, and the high turnover and the second jobbing increase this, of course. Besides, women in the cultural creative sectors lack access to structured social welfare supports, such as parental leave, childcare, pension, that could help balance this. And to note as well, the effects of inequality, and I've mentioned a few here, are cumulative, which means that higher use of part-time work, career breaks, or lack of progression will negatively impact pensions for women and cause higher level of poverty for older women. So I will briefly cite the general recommendations that we arrived to in the work and that will be published in the report. So we mentioned gender equality in the workplace, gender-sensitive communication, gender mainstreaming, which means instilling inclusion in every policy and in every process, gender budgeting, which is the same kind of process when allocating funds and resources, thinking of gender and equality when allocating this public aid, data collection, the role of culture in perception of reality and society in general, intersectionality, I won't go back to it because it was beautifully approached in the previous presentations, and the impact of crisis. So of course, notably the current pandemic, but we know that it's not the last crisis or even really the last pandemic. So it has to be taken into account. And for all these themes, the report presents a lot of good practices at all levels so that it can serve as a means of inspiration and spreading of these good practices. I want to focus briefly on one chapter, which is the chapter we did on data collection, for a few reasons. Well, first, because collecting, publishing, and monitoring data about gender gaps is essential if we want to implement fact-based and evidence-based policy. Also because it's a topic where work at a European level is both crucial and, we feel, achievable. We can work together on a common data methodology, and we can set up initiatives to collect, to analyze, and to publish comparable and relevant data. Also, it's a topic where I can share what was deemed a good practice in my country. So I will go back to it later. So what does that mean, monitoring gender gap? It means taking care of representation of women and ideally all gender minorities in every sector, not just in terms of pure numbers, not just how many women, but where are the women? Are they in positions of leadership? Do they have to face pay gap, differences in funding, etc.? There's also qualitative research to be approached in terms of, for instance, stereotypes and the way to represent women in general. One can cite the example of Swedish cinema applying the Bechdel test, for instance, which is a very basic way of determining if there's female interactions in a work of art. And of course, as was mentioned earlier, ideally all this data should be crossed intersectionally, so we can have data depending on the age, the education, and the socioeconomic level or ethnicity of women, for instance, and we can really understand where the problems are. And next, the idea is to harmonize the collection on a European level, first and foremost to find a common methodology. And this, the most notably, would be to disaggregate the data so that every collected set of data, especially by public institutions, would show gender differences so we can actually see where the differences are. And then publishing and comparing the results, of course, so we can improve from the examples. And the idea of a national observatory, so it's partially stems from the French example. You can see the cover of the latest edition right on the right, the Observatory of Equality between Men and Women in gender, in culture and communication, sorry. So it's been published since 2013, and it shows the place and the presence of women both within the ministry and public establishments, also within the sectors in general. And it shows, of course, because it's been published for 9 years, the evolution of this place and its presence. It expands every year as we gather more data and we launch more studies, basically. But still, it's only quantitative for now, sorry. And it only approaches women, not other gender minorities. And it's the statistics do not approach everything yet. So there's a lot to improve still, but still it was deemed by the group as being a good practice that could be reproduced in other countries and maybe down the line at a European level. To finish my presentation, I want to say that we were very happy, the OMC group was very happy to contribute to the presidency conclusions, German presidency conclusions on gender equality in culture. The German presidency concluded that there was a need to underline the potential of culture to advance gender equality and to acknowledge and raise awareness of persistent gender inequalities in the sector. So this was for all member states, but the European Commission was called upon, amongst others, to support transnational initiatives of gender equality in the field of culture and to promote the collection and distribution of culture-specific data on gender equality and cultural diversity in Europe. So this was my presentation. So also, although gender equality has improved, it remains an issue, of course. But we have a lot more tools now to understand what works and what doesn't and how we can inspire each other. So it has to be tackled further at all levels, and it should be a priority, we feel, under the next work plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Great. I think very synthetic presentation of specific circumstances in the cultural and creative sectors that drive gender gaps more than in other sectors. I think it was very useful. I think it's also very good to know that men are involved in the fight for gender equality. It's very important to have everyone on board. Just for our audience to let you know that the report that Paul was elaborating on will be published within the weeks to come, hopefully still in the month of May. If not, it will be the beginning of June. And apart from the recommendation, it will also provide a collection of almost, I think, 200 of good practices that we gathered across different EU member states, different sectors. So I think, honestly, I hope it's going to be useful. So thank you, dear panelists. I think it's been very interesting to listen to all of you, different perspectives, different issues that everyone touched upon. And now I think it's time for a little discussion. I have a long list of questions that I would like to ask you, but I have to be very selective because we have little time. And since Maxi mentioned the impact of the COVID crisis, of course, it's been something that touched the gender equality in general very strongly and impacted culture and creative sectors even more. I think, yeah, maybe I want to ask a question about the COVID crisis. We also spoke about intersectionality, a very important thing, but I think Isabel and Pauliana and Maxi also actually elaborated on this quite a bit. So actually, maybe I would like to start with something like really basic, but which is so omnipresent that we almost forget about it. This is the gender stereotypes. I mean, this is really one of the main drivers of the gender equality. You know, those like fixed ideas we have that basically prevent us from thinking out of the box. And I think, of course, culture is very important, powerful means to break stereotypes. And I would like maybe to ask Pauliana, because I think your pictures were absolutely amazing. I think you do a wonderful job in breaking stereotypes. But I would like to know whether you felt that your work helps indeed to dismantle stereotypes, and how does the audience react? Yeah, I would be very curious to listen to you, Pauliana. But we don't have much time, so if you could keep it, concise. Thank you.
I don't know if I understood the question, but about the stereotype, I think, of course, very important the work I do, because I really go into living with the people, and this is very important because we have to understand the other and connect, really connect. But I think the main job here, I think, is with in school with the young generations. I think we should discuss more about this stereotype. And I think I have a child. She's a girl of 13 years old, and she already thinks differently. And I think we have a long job to do, but I think in schools we have to teach about different types of people, about race, about gender, and start the discussion there. I think it's really important. I don't know if I understood your question, but
yeah, no, perfect. Yeah, it's great.
To say that, and also I think it's not enough the papers and what we read. We have really to live and put in the side of the other. I think that's the most important.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. No, I absolutely agree. And I think, yes, starting at the very early age, at preschool education, and at home, this is, that's the basic thing. So, of course, I agree. Thank you very much, Pauliana. Now, I think that what is very closely related to stereotypes is actually the language. This is also the way which impacts very much our way of thinking, the way we speak about other people. And I think, we should definitely change also our language to make it more inclusive. The man, we should not be, the default human. We should also include other genders in the common language. And I think language is something very important in lyrics of music. So I wonder what Maxi will tell us. We know that there are many performers who basically use very, very offensive, aggressive language towards women. And I wonder whether you have any special activities concerning, language.
We have not in terms of artistic creation. We're speaking to our participants all the time about kind of best practice and how we can expand our pledge to include more aspects of the music industry, or rather how we can include more aspects of experience in the pledge. So not just to affect representation, inclusion, and kind of the systemic lack of role models, but also to start to shift the culture. And I think that's where language comes into it, in that it's not just about representation and visibility. It's about making sure that when you empower individuals and support people to take up prominent spaces in the music industry, or take to the stage, or host exhibitions, that environment is safe. And I think that's about setting best practices and setting standards for inclusion. And so at many of our festivals that we work with, they have codes of conduct about what they expect both from artists and audiences when attending or performing at festivals. And for every Key Change event, we have a code of conduct for both online and in-person events, where we clearly state what is acceptable, what we expect, not just in terms of discrimination and abuse, but in terms of gendered language. So making sure that we do not assume the gender or the background of anyone involved in the panel, and that people are able to come to any event or any kind of key change activity as their whole selves, and not just one aspect of themselves, because that's what I was trying to kind of get across in my discussion about intersectionality. I think it's so important, if you want to be truly inclusive, to view everyone as individuals and not just as a gender or or as their job title suggests, or as perhaps their appearance suggests. It's important to recognize that everyone comes to each situation with many experiences and important aspects of their identity. And I think that, to encourage that safe environment, it's so important to check your language and check the kind of norms that we all have. We all have unconscious biases, and we all exist in a patriarchy. So I think we can all take those small steps to make environments more safe.
Great, Maxi. Thank you. Thank you very much. I wonder what Isabel has to tell us, because she's an actress. It's definitely, you use words. So I wonder whether you feel that the words you use or the way you use them can change people's minds. Isabel.
I think it has a lot to do with representativity, something I did not mention specifically, but representativity allows for the possibility to create other images. As an actress, the fact that I am in a film or a show or a theater, I see that my parents, neighbors where I grew up send me messages saying, I want to be an actress too. So the acting allows for the possibility to dream. Acting allows for the possibility to create. The different possibilities in the life of a child, and I apologize for the redundancy, or a teenager or an adult. I believe that as an actress, I have this responsibility. And as a black actress, we black artists in Portugal, we are always joking, saying being black is not our profession, because very often we are hired to be the black person in the show, not as actors, just like a singer or a dancer. We are hired because we are black. And so we keep saying being black is not my profession. But it's important in specific contexts that still have a very obsolete mind to bring and to do the work of an actress, but also as a historic consultant, social consultant. We do all that as actors, especially everything that has to do with playwriting. All the work that I'm involved with, I have the possibility, and also very happy to say that I have a partnership with the playwrights where I can bring added narratives from different perspectives for the same episode. So I think that we have to be aware of the narratives, the images that we create, and the relevance of acting.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel. You mentioned one thing, being the black person. I mean, it's not your job, you're hired because you're black. I think it also shows us that, there are not enough black people in the culture and creative sectors. I mean, maybe there are some obstacles to access the professions. And I think this is also one of the issues we should reflect about in the policymaking. Now, I wonder if Paul can very briefly tell us what the EU member state experts say about gender stereotypes. Are there any specific recommendations that you could highlight?
Well, there were a lot. Of course, it's a big topic, so I won't have time to approach everything, but there's a few things I can mention. First and foremost, the idea, a very essential idea, to train all staff, all teachers, educators on gender stereotypes, on unconscious gender bias and all the biases. So including men, but not only men, because as has been said before, we all have our own biases. And this type of training should be compulsory, or it only impacts people who are already interested and somewhat conscious of their biases, of course. Another things I could say is that media and culture ideally should be aware of the role they play in defining and challenging stereotypes, because they contribute to the forming, the performing of identities and to the way we understand the world. So the group was adamant in the idea in promoting research on this role of shaping the values and the interests of the population. In terms of research, there's also the idea of promoting models, historically promoting historical research on women artists, women creators, who may not be remembered as much as the male contemporaries, in spite of their talents, in spite of their significance, or even sometimes their success, and they've been forgotten. So there needs to be conscious efforts at all levels here in education, in research. And yeah, I mentioned education, there would be a lot to do there as well. Gender mainstreaming must be implemented there at all ages in terms of introducing teaching methods that challenge the stereotypes, to revise teaching and study materials to ensure that women are represented in programs, developing communication strategies as well to attract students towards careers from which they could feel excluded due to the gender norms and in spite of their own interests. For example, encouraging boys very early to try the harp, or encouraging girls to work in STEM or to pursue a career in video gaming industry, contrary to what they've been taught all their lives that it is not for them.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very sorry to say that we're coming to the end of the allotted time, but it's been a wonderful discussion, and I bet it was quite an eye-opener for quite a lot of people in the audience. So I was thinking what should be our main takeaways from this discussion. And I think we can roughly divide them into 3 groups, I would say. So firstly, I think that it's pretty clear that we have to change the collective societal approach to the deeply rooted discrimination and to the stereotypes. And how can we do it? Well, we have seen that culture is very powerful tool to promote tolerance, equality, and it's also a space to visualize an idealistic future. And this is great. Very few sectors have this power. So I think that we should definitely encourage bottom-up initiatives and projects that strive to achieve this aim. Now, gender stereotypes are apparent in the cultural sectors and, of course, elsewhere. And sexual harassment, we didn't actually mention this, but I would like to mention that it happens. It happens quite a lot, and probably much more than it is shown in the official statistics. So we definitely need to actively fight against stereotypes. We cannot be just not racist. We have to fight against racism. And, we have to promote alternative role models, for example, apply zero tolerance to sexual harassment, to sexism and gender violence. The use of gender-sensitive and gender-inclusive language is another thing that we should always bear in mind, because it avoids bias towards a particular sex or gender, or it avoids the use of expressions that exclude particular groups of people. So let's bear it in mind. Discussing gender equality must mean acknowledging the varying forms of discrimination. And we have to tackle not only discrimination of women, but also of gender diverse people. And we have to acknowledge that Black women, older women, women with disabilities can be exposed to a much higher degree of discrimination than white, young, attractive women. And finally, we have to actively fight against xenophobia, racism, ageism, poverty, social exclusion, also hate speech, that we didn't mention. And we have to, make sure that disadvantaged group have equal access to culture, both as creators and as spectators. Now, the second group of consideration is that the culture and creative sectors themselves should strive to achieve gender equality. And I think Key Change is a great example of it, because this is, the only way that the culture actually can fully reflect the diversity of expressions present in the society. So the reality is that existing barriers in the culture and creative sectors are similar as in other sectors, but the specific working conditions drive certain disparities here. So we need to put in place or support the existing networks, mentoring programs, support women entrepreneurs, even establish, quotas and targets when it comes to leadership and prestigious positions. Otherwise, we can struggle with this issue forever. The respect of work-life balance is crucial, and the equal share of unpaid care work between men, women, or partners in the family. The pays need to be transparent, and female artists and professionals, as well as other women, have to enjoy the same social security rights and pensions as men, and not be penalized due to maternity leave, for example. And then finally, the third bulk of recommendation is to policymakers, because they have a huge role to play. So when it comes to post-COVID world, we didn't really talk about this that much, but I think it's important to bear in mind that gender perspective is imperative in any sort of general and sector-specific recovery measures. And moreover, we have to establish a common data methodology at a European level so as to have comparable sets of data and a strong analysis for evidence policy making. This was a point made by Paul. Now, of course, cultural policymakers should mainstream gender into policymaking, into legislative work, and gender budgeting into funding, because this makes policies and funding tools respond more effectively to the needs of all citizens, men and women, and gender diverse people as well. Well, I'm sure I missed something, but I hope you got the message. I hope that you enjoyed this panel, that you will remember the pivotal issues. I thank you very much, dear panelists. It's been a pleasure, very fruitful discussions, and I hand it over to Porto. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that complete summary of this panel. Before moving on to the next moment, to close this panel, we'll watch a video on the AWARE Association, a testimony on underrepresentation of women in art.
Si je vous pose la question du nombre d'artistes femmes que vous connaissez, vous pourrez répondre peut-être 2, 3, 4 ou 5 noms au maximum. Tandis que si je vous pose la question pour les artistes hommes, vous pourrez en citer beaucoup plus. Je m'appelle Camille Morino, je suis historienne d'art et en 2014 j'ai créé l'association AWARE comme Archive of Women Artists Research and Exhibition. J'ai voulu répondre à la sous-représentation des artistes femmes dans le monde de l'art. L'histoire commence en 2009 lorsque je travaille à l'accrochage L à Centre Pompidou, où j'ai montré pendant 2 ans uniquement des artistes femmes dans les salles des collections permanentes. Je me suis rendu compte, en 2009, que les artistes femmes étaient absentes des livres, des expositions, des collections, mais aussi du marché de l'art. Des archives numériques d'une part, avec le site awarewomenartist.com, un site internet bilingue sur lequel sont publiées quotidiennement des notices d'artistes femmes du monde entier, illustrées et documentées, rédigé par des chercheurs et chercheuses internationaux. En réhabilitant les artistes historiques, AWARE pose ainsi le socle pour le développement des carrières des artistes contemporaines. Nous avons créé à Paris un centre de documentation unique, ouvert au public sur rendez-vous, qui regroupe plusieurs milliers de références sur les artistes femmes et l'art féministe. L'idée, encore une fois, est de créer, mettre en avant et rendre accessible au plus grand nombre l'information et la connaissance sur les artistes femmes, en encourageant et mettant en lumière la recherche scientifique. Enfin, faire connaître le travail des artistes femmes, cela passe aussi évidemment par une découverte au plus près de leurs œuvres, en rendant visibles et accessibles les expositions qui leur sont dédiées. AWARE est une association qui s'adresse à tous les publics. Nous travaillons ainsi en partenariat avec des chercheurs et chercheuses, historiens, historiennes, enseignants, enseignantes, des universités et des musées du monde entier, dans le but d'approfondir la recherche sur les artistes femmes à travers l'organisation de colloques ou journées d'études, mais aussi grâce aux publications que nous éditons. Nos partenaires sont également les grandes institutions culturelles françaises et internationales, telles que le ministère de la Culture, grâce auquel nous organisons chaque année depuis 2017 les prix AWARE pour les artistes femmes. Ces prix récompensent à la fois une artiste émergente et nous permet donc de soutenir la jeune création artistique, et le prix d'honneur, décerné quant à lui à une artiste confirmée pour l'ensemble de sa carrière. Car on sait bien que les prix contribuent à la visibilité et à la notoriété des artistes, notamment sur le marché de l'art. C'est l'information qui crée de la valeur. D'ailleurs, les galeries et les foires d'art contemporain constituent aussi pour AWARE des partenaires et collaborateurs privilégiés. L'histoire de l'art était une histoire d'hommes, elle doit devenir celle des femmes également.